What's up guys, it's your boy Endymion here with yet another video game review. This time it's the final game in a 4-part game series set in a world that has existed for decades at this point. This is The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 4 End of Saga. Man, that's a mouthful. The first game in the arc came out all the way back in 2015, with each release coming a few years later. If you're not familiar with these games or this series in a whole, The Legend of Heroes is a series of Japanese role-playing games that started about 30 years ago as Dragon Slayer Legend of Heroes, but eventually grew into its own thing and became its own franchise. Each game follows different heroes in various parts of the world facing unimaginable threats and forming bonds. The Cold Steel games, however, follow a group of military cadets called Class 7, and each game follows how Class 7 deals with the various political and military conflicts erupting across their nation from game to game. Anyway, Trails of Cold Steel 4 is the final part in this particular saga, and it's all about stopping, and this isn't a spoiler really, I mean it's in all the pre-press info, it's about Class 7 and the various other heroes from other games in the franchise assembling together Avengers style to stop an event called the Great Twilight from happening and basically ending the world. I'll start off with what I like about this series, as there are things I definitely dislike about this game in particular. Anyway, the music is amazing. The sheer breadth of world building and areas to explore is really insane, and there are some really cool moments and interesting plot developments, which makes sense since this is the final game in this particular saga. The combat system is also solid, especially for a turn-based RPG game. It honestly feels like the developer Neon Falcom have fully explored and done what they could with the battle system, which is both good and bad. It's good because it means a series which was confirmed recently to be moving away from turn-based battles and instead going into more of a action-oriented gameplay style with its currently in development title, which has me hella excited. But on the negative side of that, the battle system doesn't feel particularly new compared to, say, Cold Steel 3 or even 2 really. It's not bad by any means, but it would have been nice to have some evolution, especially for a game this long. And now, I'll get to my negatives. For starters, Cold Steel 4 is the definition of a bloated experience. It has far too much dialogue, and there's a borderline ridiculous level of padding to the game's story and gameplay. Cold Steel 4's dialogue is like when you were a kid and your parents saw someone in a grocery store they knew and they just wouldn't stop talking. Characters tend to drone on in these games to almost ludicrous levels, and even playing the game in high speed mode, my playtime exceeded just over 100 hours of game time, which, yeah, it definitely felt like 100 hours, I'll tell you that. Another thing to go with the bloatedness of the game, and really the entire Cold Steel series as a whole, is that there are, in my opinion, way too many characters and storylines and relationships to keep track of. Like, you're literally bumping into people you know everywhere you go. It gets to the point where I'm being stopped so regularly by all these conversations to hear what some guy in some class I wasn't in is doing with his life, and I'm literally just here to buy something, and now I have to listen to not just this random classmate's life story, but probably someone else as well who joins in on the conversation. It may sound like I'm taking a dump on Cold Steel, but I have to be honest here with this. There's a level or threshold of what would be considered dialogue enhancing a game and dialogue being a detriment in holding the actual game back. Cold Steel is literally walls of text and people talking, almost all the time if you're not in a dungeon fighting monsters. Even then it gets kind of ridiculous. Like when you're about to do something, everyone and their cat has to chime in and give their 2 cents, and it gets grating on the ears, like it's borderline ridiculous at times. And here comes another thing many Trails fans will either love or hate, but for me I'm somewhere in the middle with this, and that's the cast. The amount of playable characters in this game is ridiculous. Like, it's no exaggeration when I say everyone and their grandmother is playable in this game. And it doesn't help that not every character in this particular saga of Trails is created with the same level of importance or creativity. Machias is just there most of the time. Elliot is Elliot. Gaius won't shut up about the wind, and so on and so on. Honestly, I thought the original Class 7 was already too many characters for a series to juggle, and I was really glad when I played Cold Steel 3 when that game started with a much smaller cast, at first anyways, because not only was that new Class 7 more relatable and interesting, but they were given ample time each to grow because there wasn't a supermarket worth of people fighting for the spotlight. Look, again, it might look like I'm dunking on Cold Steel 4 here, but in all honesty, it's a solid experience that has the unfortunate task of spinning way too many plates, storylines, relationships, and payoffs for one game. My only hope is that the future of the Legend of Heroes franchise dials back the dialogue, focuses the playable characters more, and offers more customization. Less playable characters, but more focused storylines and developments for the characters that are playable. According to the wiki for Cold Steel 4, there are a ludicrous 39 playable characters in this game. And like I said, they are not made equally in terms of quality, in my opinion, of course. For every interesting character like Altina, Ash, or Muse, you have your Elliots, Machias, Gaius, or hell, even Laura is pretty sidelined after the first game, really. It's just the unfortunate caveat when a cast bloats to this size. You can't conceivably give everyone the care and attention they deserve when there's this many of them. And that's not even accounting for plot lines and payoffs, etc. for non-playable characters, which in and of itself is a massive amount too. And my final big complaint, with not really just Cold Steel 4, but all games made by Falcom, is the frustrating amount of missable content. From character notes, quests, items, random minigame stuff, you name it. You almost have to play this game with a guide, otherwise you'll 100% miss something. The character notes especially is just ridiculous, and the amount of them you need to 100% is just insane. You have to use a guide, and I find that to be detrimental because you're constantly having to check to make sure you don't miss anything, and that's not really how I like playing games, but when I have to, when this amount of stuff is missable, it's annoying. Anyway, enough with my complaining. I hope you understand that as a fan of Trails of Cold Steel in its entirety, I still think the series is worth playing if you're into JRPGs, but just be aware that this entry in particular is so full of bloat and missable content that it makes my head spin just thinking about it. But when it was all said and done and the credits rolled on the true ending, I was around a level 150 with about 78% of the trophies. I was glad I played it, but I will never play the Cold Steel games again. They're just so bloated, even if the music and all that is great. So I rank games on a rank F all the way to the maximum rank S, and I'm giving The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel a B rank, which means good. Anyway, what's your favorite game in the Trails series? Do you agree or disagree with my review? Please subscribe, like, and comment for more reviews like this one. My name is Endymion, and I'm so glad I can put this game behind me and move on. See ya.